Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Stroke. I am your host and stroke survivor, Jerry Wald. And for those of you that are new, because I can see a lot of people out there um, not making comments yet, which is so cool. But anyway, if you're new to this channel, I started doing this to bring awareness to stroke, TBI, aphasia, brain injury, and also to provide a platform for all survivors to share their journeys from literally across the world. And also bringing on experts in brain health so they can share their knowledge with all of us so we can learn more about the brain. And if you have not done so, please subscribe to Let's Talk Stroke, my YouTube channel. I appreciate it. And my guest this morning, stroke MS survivor, Will Schmierer, and he'll be sharing his journey. And if you have any questions, please ask questions, make comments, and if you and look forward to the show. So sit back and relax. Good morning. Who's here? Let's see. Marina, nice to see you. And Kevin, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here. And again, let's welcome Will. Good morning.
Hey, what's up, Jerry? How's it going?
Good, good. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Fresh off the treadmill, still sweating.
That's
Love the
awesome.
opener. I use a similar title to the screen when I do live streams. So.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been doing this for years, and I still mumble around. But it I don't know if this is. I'm trying to see if anybody here is on Facebook because I've been having such issues since they deleted me for who knows why. Like we talked, it's my first Facebook thing I've ever done way back when, and but anyway, it's okay. I've started a new one, but anyway, this is Will, and
What's up,
please
everybody?
ask questions, and good to see you guys. So, who is Will? You had a
Who
stroke,
is? Yeah.
you know, kind of right near the pandemic, right?
Yeah. So December 2019. 2019, I moved my family and I from Virginia to Florida. It was a kind of a chaotic, weird thing. I was still working in web development. It was not an easy move. Sold the house in Virginia, stayed in Virginia a little bit, then halfway through the summer, moved the family down to St. Augustine here, which was awesome. We stayed in an Airbnb on the beach before our Airbnb really imploded.
Yeah.
Worked out really well. Waiting to move into our new house. Closed on, ironically, September 11th. I only remember that because it was September 11th, and I was
Yeah.
very skeptical about closing on the
Yeah.
house that day. But it worked out well,
Exactly.
and I was excited to be back in Florida after like a close to 10-year hiatus. So it was probably more like 7 or 8, but yeah, a hiatus from Florida. Jacksonville was up and coming. I mean, it's always been a spread out city, a big city with a lot of suburban sprawl, but we were in a nice little quiet area, which has now become less quiet in the last 5 years.
Wow. Wow.
So it's losing some of its appeal. Yeah, was really looking forward to getting down here, working out, getting back to a healthy lifestyle. I was changing some things in my personal life, was moving up in my company while working remotely still. Then December of 2019, I'd gotten big and out of shape, which is weird for a former athlete and just somebody that was in pretty good shape most of his life. I just
Right.
had kids, did the usual dad kind of. You always hear those jokes and stories about how a dad kind of mimics the wife during pregnancy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything kind of went south for me health wise. I wasn't paying attention. I was anti doctors, just the way I grew up. And yeah, December 2019, had a stroke in the hospital, be 2 days before Christmas. So there's a lot to that story.
Right.
But yeah, I remember having the stroke in the hospital. They put me down on the stroke floor eventually. Surprising, obviously, at 37, I was, I said yesterday when we were chatting, it's the midlife crisis nobody wants.
Yeah.
However, it may have saved my life. So I went to inpatient rehab January 2020, came out of the hospital, learned some educational things about stroke that I was not aware of, obviously. Wasn't anticipating that at 37.
You're right.
I thought I was having a second stroke right after the Super Bowl. In fact, the morning after the Super Bowl in 2020. Woke up talking funny. Was feeling weird. I went to the hospital. Long story short, after a month in the hospital, again, February 2020, they did a spinal tap. They found out I was in downtown Jack's here. They thought I might have a brain tumor. They thought a couple of things, but they did the spinal tap. Turns out, got diagnosed with MS, unbeknownst to me, no family history. It was weird. It was weird, but I was thrilled to hear that it was MS and not a brain tumor.
Right.
As bad as that sounds, that
Yeah.
seemed like the better option given the choice. I mean, I would have rather had nothing, as we all would as survivors. But yeah, so I
Yeah.
was from the stroke. I was paralyzed on the right hand side of my body, which is always fun being right handed and right
Yeah.
side dominant.
I'm with you.
The MS hit the left side.
Wow.
So I was pretty fully incapacitated for a while. Thankfully, MS is a little more temporary when you have an exacerbation like I had,
Wow.
which is kind of like those don't happen often given my type. It's a long story. Nobody knows, is it related to stroke? Is it not related to stroke? Blah blah blah. Whatever it was, I wasn't doing great things for myself despite being a fairly intelligent guy, going to college, working his way up the ladder, so to speak,
Yeah.
doing good things. Yeah, and so I was incapacitated on both sides. Kind of worked through that. I was inpatient a second time in 2020, right up until the pandemic.
Right. Right. I just want to ask one thing. When you go
Sure.
to therapy, because people can't see, but you're a pretty tall guy. I mean, you're a big guy.
I am a huge guy. I am 6'8", and I still say 300 pounds, but that's only because I want to sound that big now. I'm actually under 300, but I still say 300 because it sounds cooler to me. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I'm basically bigger than most NFL left tackles.
Yeah.
Or I was, I should say. Now I'm leaned down a little bit, trying to get the muscle mass back in action. I kind of wanted to get lean and go back up rather than, you know, I'm already big, I'm already strong. I didn't, yeah. So yeah, so that's an interesting thing with therapy because nobody's prepared for a 6'8" stroke survivor. Nobody's prepared for a 6'8" stroke survivor with MS that can't walk. That was 500 pounds at the time. Um, so yeah, that's been an interesting part of my journey is like doing the rehab. I can do the work that everybody else can do, but sometimes the equipment just
Can't
like
take you.
clothes, clothes I can find now, thankfully, because Amazon and a lot of big and tall places are much more modern than they were, say, even 20 years ago when I was in high
Right.
school. Um,
Right.
yeah, thankfully, basketball players and football players, things have become more popular. So, like, I get the Under Armour, I can get the Nike, I can get the things that I couldn't get again 20 years ago.
No.
I remember being in high school and I had to shop at like a lot of the urban streetwear that was coming up in the 90s. That all
Right.
appealed to me because it was for bigger guys. Like yes, as it sounds like, you remember Biggie Smalls, he kind of big rappers in New York, like they sort of set that culture. I used to wear Sean John and Rockaware and all those
Yeah.
things
I
because it was
remember
all
that.
that would fit. But yeah, so that was really interesting. And on top of that, I have 3 kids and a wife. My wife is deaf. My kids are now, they're now 21 and a half, 10 and 9. At the time, they were like 4 or 5 and
How do they
just
take it?
the boys didn't really realize, and they kind of still don't realize how, I mean, they've seen me work hard the last 5 years, or
Yeah.
4 and a half. So they kind of get it, but they kind of don't. My daughter, obviously being older, had a pretty good understanding, but none of us were educated. Nobody really knew what was going to be involved. I remember telling one of my neurologists very early on, he's like, you're a mess. You're going to be, I was like, oh, I'll be better in 2 or 3 days. And I remember laughing 2 or 3 years ago. I was like, oh, I'm not better in 2 or 3 years. But yeah, it's been really interesting, eye-opening, enlightening, to some degree. I think it saved my life.
Yeah.
I watched a documentary last night that made me realize that things we do in our 30s and 40s can affect us long term. So, in a real twist of events, I do think this will help me long term. I'm getting back in shape. I'm doing none of the things I used to do. I'm
Yeah.
really getting after it, so to speak. I think that happens a lot in midlife, but I think now, not only do I not have a choice, I want to, and I know that it will help long term. So yeah,
Right.
yeah. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, no, you keep doing your thing. So recovering from stroke.
And battling with MS. Yep. Yep. The MS is interesting because, again, I'm sure it happens. I have yet to personally meet somebody who's had a stroke and then been diagnosed with MS. It's usually they have MS and they might have a stroke later on for
Right.
various reasons. Either they become MS affects everybody differently. It's
Yeah.
There are, of course, just like stroke, there are lots of overlaps and similarities between the variances and types of strokes. Oh, and for those out there that care, mine was an ischemic stroke, which is, again, pretty unusual to be. You have to do a lot of work in the wrong direction at 37 to have an ischemic stroke.
Mhm.
So, yeah, um, there's that. And the MS is weird because I often don't know, is this residual from the stroke? Is it MS? Is it some kind of combination? Typically, I say yes. And it doesn't really matter to me. I just have to figure out what works for me, how to live life, how to do the best I can.
Right.
The thing I hate about MS is, and I told you yesterday, I'll tell everybody here, I kind of was a very functional alcoholic for most of
Yeah.
my midlife. I went to University of Miami, nothing on them. I loved being in Miami. I loved having a good drink, and
Yeah.
as you can imagine, at 6'8", things affect you differently. you know, to get a 6'8", 300-pound guy drunk is a lot different than getting a 5'5", 200-pound guy. So
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
had this. Yeah,
You're
sorry,
good at it.
yeah. I was, yeah. That's the thing. I am good at anything you put in front of me. I excel at it, whether it's good for me or bad for me. I used to be a competitive eater in the 2000s.
Really?
I never made it to Nathan's Coney Island, which was always a goal of mine, but I stupidly did a lot of qualifiers against other really good eaters. I don't know if you remember the Sonia Thomas. She's based out of Maryland. She was like she was kind of one of the original female eaters that before they started separating male and female eaters. She was just
Right.
part of the crew, and she was a beast. And so I would go against her in Norfolk every year for Nathan's, and she would beat me every year by like she would eat like 40, and I was like, oh. I never got past like 31, I think, and that was
But
the
she
old
wasn't that
days.
big.
No, no, I have pictures. She was like up to my shin. She's literally like probably 5 feet, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a beast. I mean, she was
Wow.
amazing. So yeah, never made it to Coney Island. So I do not look after all my piercings. I often need my wife to twist them and turn them when I have to take them out every year for my MS MRIs, which
Oh,
she hates. But yeah, sorry, I saw that and I just thought I should answer that.
yeah.
Yeah. So again, I'm sadly good at a lot of things, whether they're good for me or bad for me. I'm
Right.
just one of
And
those guys that goes all in.
yeah, and you've changed completely, right? How you eating
Yeah.
from and drink. I mean, I don't know it completely, but I would think.
Yeah. No, I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do any of the things I used to do. It's kind of like, so before I went to college, I really didn't. I smoked a little in high school, but like kind of that high school young kid smoking thing,
Yeah.
where it was very easy to quit. And whenever I was playing sports, stop smoking, no big deal. College got a little lax, got into the partying and drinking. It was just, probably a lot of combination of things, anxiety as a kid.
Yeah.
I went to school for architecture. It was long hours. It was a lot of work. It was a stress reliever for me. It wasn't anything else. It's just that thing that a lot of smokers have. They don't necessarily want to smoke. They just get into bad habits and
Yeah.
patterns. And I would say the drinking was part of that. And so Yeah. So yeah, my entire lifestyle is different now. So I'm kind of back to where I was pre 18,
Wow,
where
that's
I'm taking
incredible.
care of my body, I'm eating right. The running is an interesting thing that I do now. I hated running my whole life. As I told you yesterday, I played sports. I would just be like, well, I'm the biggest guy on the field. I could either run or not run. You pick. I'll play in the game or I'll run laps. Most of the time it was not running laps.
Right.
And I kind of got into running accidentally. Maybe not accidentally, because I have a lot of friends that run, people that love running. I will state very clearly, I am not your typical runner. I'm a stroke runner, first of all, so I run a little awkwardly, but I do it. And I
Yeah.
exercise now. I love exercising. I actually hate when I don't exercise. So I've run over 600 and probably I think we're 640 something days in a row with only like 4 total days off, and that's either been because I've been out of town or had a small seizure the night before. That still happens. Again, I'm not sure if that's stroke related, MS related, or some combination.
Right.
But
That's incredible.
they're very mild now. But running's changed my life. It really, I don't know if it's been you could take it two ways. It could just be, well, I don't do those other things, so maybe now I'm addicted to running. Fine.
Yeah.
There's really no
Absolutely.
downsides to that, except for you got to know how to take care of your body, recovery, all those things, health and eating. Running helps me. I'm a big guy. I like eating, whether it's good food or bad food. Sometimes it's too much food, but if you burn 4,000 plus calories a day, well, you can eat pretty
Yeah.
much
Wow. That's
any
incredible. You
fish,
can run.
chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what residuals effects do you have from the stroke? I mean, it sounds like the MS is kind of,
Yeah, the MS is really the thing that messes things up for me.
yeah,
I think that's where I was going earlier. Is that so? I used to pride myself on a big guy. As a big guy, I had very good dexterity. I was in architecture school, which is a fancy word for art school that doesn't sound like art school. So I love drawing. I love writing. My right hand is very weak still in terms of like writing. I was actually even practicing last night just to I like to check in every now and then.
yeah,
It seems to get better, but I really would have to practice it full time to get it to where I want it to be. And I just don't, it's always, I think as survivors, we have to pick and choose our battles. Where do you
yeah,
want to focus? Like I started, I was like, I'm going to walk again. Watch me. And I did.
yeah.
And now I'm running and it's, so the residuals are mostly around, I would say mostly my right hand is the sort of last thing that I personally hate. So I used to be a developer. I used to type close to 80 to 100 words a minute.
Wow.
Typing is a little annoying now. Thankfully, there are tools like Talk to Type, voice notes, all those
Yeah,
things help make life a little easier. So it
yeah,
does.
absolutely.
I use them as a crutch when I really should be practicing typing. Um, at the beginning of the year, I was doing some what is it called? Sorry, daily pages I was working on, and then I was doing really well on that. I did like 150 days straight, and then I stupidly started grad school this year at 41 to get a master's in psychology. So
Good
that
for you, though.
daily morning writing became sort of my work for school. So it's kind of shifted a little. Yes, Kevin, I am able to drive now. That took about a year and a half. Um, so 2020, when I came out of inpatient, I was home right before the pandemic. Blessing and a curse for all of us, probably. Everybody was able to slow down. So I did not feel at that time when I came out that I was at any real disadvantage, except for the fact that I was in a wheelchair, which was also good because we were going to therapies and things like that. And just, I remember I used to see my wife dealing with the wheelchair or my daughter, and I would just be so like, I couldn't do anything. I hated it. I really
Mm,
did. Also, you can imagine being 6'8" and then being forced to sit down is not a particularly great vantage point for me
right.
or for probably
Yeah.
anybody. And the world is not very wheelchair friendly in 2020. Well, it's the last, it hasn't changed, sadly. It's just very unfriendly.
Right. Right. Do you take meds?
I do.
Oh,
I still take a fair amount of things. I'm trying to get off of them. I'm weaning down on some of them because I
yeah.
realize It's very funny that you bring that up because I watched a documentary last night on Alzheimer's, which is not tied to stroke or MS, but is definitely a brain injury, definitely
Yeah.
relates to what I'm studying in psychology.
Mm,
Um, and I'm fascinated by it because I'm trying to get off some of the SSRIs that I was on from the beginning because they very, and I agree with them in the beginning. I thought, yeah, you know what? I had a stroke. I probably should be mindful because I could fall into depression. It probably helped
yeah.
a lot that first year. Then I kept taking it. I'm like, do I
Well,
need to keep taking this? Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So the working out and the eating right has really changed my life a lot. I think it's helped tremendously. There are other things that I've done over the last 4.5 years. As you can tell, going back for a master's, I'm kind of one of
yeah,
those people that I go into things. I have done a lot of research. I'm really that continuous learner. I believe in that. I just there is not really a lot stopping me from digging into the research, finding out things that I could do to better myself. I want to share that with other people, like
yeah,
a lot of us as survivors do. It's like, I never want to tell anybody this worked for me. It'll absolutely work for you because that's nonsense. I know that's nonsense. I just want to be like, hey, I was 500 pounds. I had a stroke at 37. Some people are older, some people are younger.
yeah,
Here's sort of my story and the things that I went through. These things worked. They may work for you. You might want to try them. I often tell people I think it's a lot of trial and error because
yeah,
it's so individualized.
yeah,
And it's funny the feedback and the kickback you get from doctors and medicine on that. It's like, well, no, don't just try things. I mean, well, yeah, don't just try things. But like, if you're 500 pounds and you can't walk, well, let's start with walking because then you
right.
start walking and then you can get to. It's not like I had a stroke and got diagnosed with MS, came out right as the pandemic in April of 2020 and started running 10,000 miles. Like, no,
It doesn't happen, right?
that took 3 years to even get to a point where I could even like think about a
Yeah.
jog,
Did you
So
get
it's
the? Did you when you were? Because it's funny. You were in the hospital when you had your stroke.
yeah, that's a
Did you get
fun
the? Yeah.
thing that I did not get the TPA. That was not a thing I knew about. That was not something that was brought up. And to anybody out there, if you do have a stroke in the hospital, boy, you gotta be careful. Because I initially, after I came out, I had called around a little just to see like, "Hey, I had a stroke in the hospital. Isn't that weird?" Like, and they're like, "Yeah, that is weird." I was like, "Is there any recourse? Like, is there any?" And looking back, I always said I didn't wanna file any kind of lawsuit or do any kind of thing like that, but, like, we're close to 5 years out now. I have probably spent several $100,000 on my recovery. When you start totaling up the insurance, the bills,
Yes.
the equipment, the tools that I bought, I'm sure you have too probably now that you're like 15 years into it,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and just recovering some of the costs that it's cost me, would have
Yeah.
been nice. It was never my intent to, like, try to make money off of having a stroke in the hospital, but long story short, I called around in the beginning and I got waved off and they're like, "No, no," and I just think I
Mhm.
didn't have the right tools or connections at the time, and, a couple of years later, I was like, "Oh, I'll figure it out myself," and I have, and I've done well, and, then I found out that time had expired on any actual recourse by the time I finally talked to somebody about.
The statute of limitations. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really frustrating as a survivor because again, it's not like I was trying to make more money. It just would have been nice to recoup the costs that it cost me.
Yeah.
Just the
Absolutely.
bare minimum of covering the insurance because I went back to work after my stroke. I tried to stay there for about a year and a half more. I wound up just leaving. Um, you
I
know,
know.
I wasn't forced out, but it certainly felt that way a little bit.
Yes. 100%. I know.
And it was really weird because I'd worked there for about 8 years up until I left.
Wow.
But there were a couple factors. I think
Sure.
everybody who has a stroke or a major medical life event in general, whether you're a stroke survivor, you get diagnosed with MS, cancer, same thing.
Yeah.
You could sort of struggle through it, you power through it, you do the best you can, but at the end of the day, you realize like, is what I'm doing really that important? Like,
Yeah. No,
you know, I,
I understand. Did
I
you
probably
get?
got
Did
a
you
little.
ever? Oh,
What's that?
sorry. I just wanted. Did you ever get the? Since you're in the hospital, did you? Did you get the TPA, the clot busting drug?
No. Yeah, no, they
Yeah.
did not
Wow.
administer that. I think the problem was, to be honest, I think that I may have had the stroke while I was sleeping, potentially, or like I didn't really know it had happened. I just remember kind of napping one afternoon and then waking up, and I kind of vaguely remember this. I had tried to go to the bathroom because I had to go to the bathroom, and I somehow powered myself there, and I think the stroke had already happened, and I remember just feeling really numb,
Yeah.
and I mentioned that to people, and I struggled. I got to the bathroom, but I sort of went to go, how do I say this? Yeah, I went to go take a pee,
Yeah.
and it was really not, men get in trouble for not aiming correctly. I thought I had really trouble aiming that time, but I think I thought, and probably why they thought, right? I just thought, oh, I was sitting down in the hospital bed for a while. I must just have like, my legs must just have fallen asleep. Got back to the bed with it was an issue, but I didn't make it an issue, and nobody realized it was an issue. And so my wife, I think she had taken my kids out to lunch during that time, and she came back and she's like, "Your face is drooping." I'm like, What do you
Huh.
mean?" Yeah. And I obviously had already had the stroke, so I think I didn't realize what was going on. Again, this was 2 days before Christmas in 2019. So probably understaffed hospital. I remember one of the people telling me, "Oh, you probably have a pinched nerve from laying down," and it really, so, to be
Yeah.
clear, I was admitted because they found out I had AFib, probably the day before, so they admitted me to the hospital.
At
They
your
saw that I had.
size,
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt, but I'm doing it. That's a stroke
No, no. Go ahead.
brain. Um, was how because you said you were like 500 pounds, you're six
Yeah.
foot eight. Did you have any blood pressure issues?
I did, which I was unaware of. So there was high blood pressure there, which is why I actually went to the hospital in the first place, because somebody's like, "You're gonna have a stroke. You're gonna basically explode." So I thought I was going to the hospital, get a handful of pills, and be done with it.
Yeah.
Which might have been the case, except for they monitored me up, and I guess I went into AFib when I was there, and they're like, "Holy crap, you have AFib, and you didn't even know it," because I was so big, I had no idea.
Right.
When you're a big guy, like I walk into things, I don't realize I've just walked into things, whether that's MS or being 6'8" or being a stroke survivor, who knows? So yeah, they admitted me for AFib. They admitted me because they were going to shock my heart into rhythm on
Right.
Christmas Eve, and these dates might be a little blurry, but it was like the Monday before Christmas of
Right.
2019.
Interesting.
So I think Christmas was a Tuesday. They were going to, maybe it was a day or two before, it might have been the 23rd. They were going to shock my heart into rhythm.
Wow.
I had the stroke the day before. Again, they told me it pinched nerve. They told me this or that. Things weren't showing up on scans, but I was so big they couldn't get me into the MRI. I think they could only do CAT scan, and they weren't sure, to the best of my recollection, that I
Wow.
had suffered a stroke. And it wasn't until that next morning they brought me into surgery to shock my heart back into rhythm. And that's when they confirmed that I did in fact have a stroke, and that I was going to be effed, for a lack of a better word.
Yeah. They
And
don't give
that's
you
when
hope.
yeah, they don't give you hope, which is good, because you are kind of effed once you have the stroke. There's no magic pill, as we know. There's no
Yeah.
reversing it. That you can only do kind of what I'm doing now, and you have for a long time, is work on things and just try to get better.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't realize just how effed you are typically when you have a stroke. Some
Right.
people are lucky. People look at me now and they're like, "Oh, you had a stroke?" Yeah, yeah. Well, I put in hundreds of thousands of dollars into my recovery. I run 20 miles a day. I'm insane. I'm intense. I'm a lot. Um, Not everybody has the ability or capability to do that.
Right. Right.
So don't look at me and think this is going to happen. Look at me as like, this could happen,
Sure.
if you can, but not everybody can. So yeah, long story short, they confirm it. They put me on the fourth floor.
That's
which is the stroke floor.
that's mine was the fourth floor too. How funny.
You know what really annoyed me about the whole thing too, and I don't know that they could have done anything about it, but like they had me up attached to all these, in the hospital they put all these stickers and things all over you to monitor you,
Yeah,
and nobody caught it on the monitors. Like again, they were probably monitoring me for AFib. They probably weren't thinking stroke, which is still confusing to me because they're a
yeah,
hospital, they're an institution. I understand at holiday times things are understaffed, but the local so I went to an urgent care center, and that's where I was told by the woman there that your blood pressure is insane. You have to go to the hospital, and you might have a stroke. Somehow that didn't translate to the hospital, where they should be concerned that I might have a stroke on their watch, which
yes,
is
absolutely.
incredibly frustrating now. And I don't blame anybody. Like I said, I never wanted to pursue a lawsuit or any kind. I just looking back, it would have been nice to recoup some of the costs.
Yeah,
Not all of them, you
absolutely.
know.
No, I'm with it.
Part of it's my own doing. I take full responsibility for living a lifestyle that was, and when I say alcoholic, I really do mean functional alcoholic. Like I put my kids to bed, I did my work, I by all accounts, and probably to my what's the word I'm looking for? To my detriment, I sort of hid it. I hid it from my wife. I hid it from my kids. I hid it from my friends. I hid it from my
Right.
family. Nobody would have realized. Nobody did realize that I was an alcoholic because I would
Yeah,
just pound beer after beer after beer, and I would just take and replace, and people just thought I'd drinking one beer the whole night, and it turns out I'm drinking 20.
right. Did you have a pacemaker put in since you had AFib or
No, no,
no? Okay.
I have put my cardiologist put a device in, not a pacemaker, but it's something that monitors me to make
Yeah.
sure that I do not go back into AFib. And I think we have, I forget what it's called. I don't really love it. I actually
RMS?
kind of want
No.
it. Yeah, I have an app for it. It's annoying because I don't
Yeah.
love medical technology because I feel like it's very insecure at times.
Right.
But there is a device that's hooked up to my phone that goes to monitoring. I kind of want it out now because it's coming up on the 3-year mark, and so I think it will come out next
Oh,
April,
good.
even if I don't bitch and complain about it. And yeah, it's been helpful, but I haven't had a blip on it since it was installed. I think as I said
And you,
earlier, nobody wants to have a stroke at any age. I think at 37, I got lucky because I'm a little younger, because I sort of knew I should have been able to avoid this, in all honesty, in the first
yeah,
place. I didn't.
yeah,
I had to learn the hard way, which is
yeah,
my MO. And then, I really have made significant changes
yeah, yeah.
as a
Obviously, you
result.
did.
Yeah.
I mean, 200 pounds. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You
It's closer to
lost.
250, actually.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Good for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you should be so proud of that.
I am.
You,
I am
you
proud of
should be.
myself. I think I have a hard time accepting that I'm proud because I know I did all the damage in the first place, and I'm now reversing a lot of
Yeah,
that. And I have a tough time with the fact that people are like, "Oh, it's so inspiring," and I'm like, "Is it though?" Because I did
yeah,
all the damage in the first place. And I'm really just fixing kind of the crap I did to myself.
yeah, but that is inspiring because you could have just, stayed in
Yeah,
depression and just, I'm going to eat more. I mean,
yeah, no, I don't think I'm going to fit any more food in my body at that point, Jerry.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It was getting
Wow.
hard. It was actually, I knew something was wrong because my breathing was off, and I had tried to stop smoking the summer before, and I actually did up until we closed on our house here, and then I got back into it for like yeah, that might have been part of it.
Oh,
Is that I stopped, then I started again.
oh, okay.
Right? Yeah. So there were indications. There were things, should have gone to the doctor sooner, but I was so kind of I don't want to say I was like overpowered by the alcohol, but I was definitely using it as a crutch, and yeah,
Yeah. Does
all to my detriment.
does not drinking anymore bother you that you don't do it or
No, which is amazing.
wow,
I
okay.
now
Cool.
look at life and I'm like, why did I drink so much? I didn't even like the taste of beer. I realized that when you're my size, I just
Yeah.
like I drink a lot of water. Like, why was I just not drinking water that whole time?
Yeah. If I would have,
The
could
same
have.
thing with smoking now. Like, I can't even believe I smoked. I didn't think I'd ever be this person, but now I'm like, when I see somebody smoking, I'm like, oh, that's so gross. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that takes
And
5 years out, you kind of things change. But yeah, I never thought I'd be that person. So if you
yeah.
are that
Wow.
person and you smoke, please don't. I mean, I know stroke survivors who have gone back to smoking,
Oh yeah.
still drink. I was just like, man,
Yeah. No, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I know. I was talking to somebody who was online. He was smoking during when he got able to walk out of the hospital, sneak out of the hospital, smoking 3 packs a day and drinking,
Mm,
I don't know, a ton. So
yeah.
he did it, but
So that's the other interesting part is when I came out of inpatient in January of 2020. So I just had the stroke in
right.
December, did 30 days in inpatient, came out. It was Super Bowl week. I was like, oh, maybe I'll get some beers. And I remember we bought the beer. I didn't drink any of them. They
Wow.
went in the back fridge that we had, and they wound up staying there forever till I threw them out. But
Wow.
I almost wonder if having that event that led me to go back to the hospital for the MS. So now we're talking, I was like 90 days of
No.
sobriety, no smoking, no drinking. Like, could I at first have shifted potentially,
Yeah.
but did being in the hospital for another 30 and then in inpatient for almost another 30? Was that almost like a full 90-day detox?
Right.
It's
Cold
it's
turkey.
interesting to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Which
That,
again, kind of like nobody knows why you have MS or why MS develops. There are theories, there's research, there are things that you can point to, but really, can you?
yeah.
Did some of that, did the 30-day part detox? Was that like just like, did that that happened out of necessity because of having the stroke? But did that maybe exacerbate the exacerbation for the MS? Like, I've done a lot of research on the brain. I continue to do that. I'm doing that in school. That's why I'm really going on after this degree. It's because obviously, I think I told you yesterday, everyone in my family has a master's or a PhD except for me. I'm
Wow.
the last of
Pretty
the
impressive.
family. Yeah, yeah,
The whole
it is,
the
and
whole
it's annoying. But
thing.
yeah, it's
And
funny too because when I was in high school, I wanted to be a brain surgeon, which thankfully I'm not because I wouldn't have the dexterity to do that. But I also think that was not really that was the interesting path to me before going into architecture. Then realizing there was way too much science in it. But yeah, it's interesting to go there now because now I'm like really interested in the brain, but from a different perspective. And
yeah.
it's like, how do you, you know, for helping stroke survivors, how do you overcome this? How do you get to this peak performance? How do we cognitively function? There's a lot to it. I mean,
Did
I
you
could
know
go
what
on
a
for
stroke was prior to your stroke? I mean, did you know like the warning signs? Because I never knew
no,
anything. Yeah.
no. I mean, I remember hearing "Be Fast." I remember this. Remember this. I remember
Yeah.
doing this with a buddy of mine when I was a kid. And he's like, "Oh, well, if you do this and you can't do it, that means you've had a stroke." And I kid you not, it was like 4th grade. My friend Drew, we lived in New Jersey at the time. He
Really?
lived down 4 or 5 houses down the street. I don't recall, but maybe his grandma or grandfather had a stroke, and that's the only thing I remember, really about stroke. But it's even more than that. It's 2 things. 1, the signs of a stroke, like we're talking about it right now. Like, how come the
Right.
people at the medical facility? I was at a hospital in Jacksonville, Florida. This is
Right.
not Podunk, Montana. This is a major city in the United States. And how come they didn't really
Yeah.
understand some of those things? And I get it. Again, like I said, they thought pinched nerve. They probably thought they looked at me, they're like 37, but then they look at me and be like, well, this guy's like 500 pounds. I know he's only 37, but this is like dangerously big for
Yeah. But
anybody.
your wife said your face is drooping.
Yeah,
And
and that's the other thing.
yeah.
They ignored my wife because my wife is deaf. And we live here in St. Augustine, Jacksonville, right on the border. So St. Augustine is pretty well known for having a deaf school. It's one of the few places that
Oh,
actually has a deaf school. So the deaf community here is bigger than other areas. She was completely ignored. And to my own detriment, again, I kind of brushed it off when she said it. I was like, nah, nah, nah. I mean,
wow.
But
I was
yeah,
too young, whatever. So,
devices for my arm. Sorry.
oh, no, keep and that's thanks for asking the questions. I appreciate it.
But yeah, so my wife was kind of ignored, and I kind of brushed her off too. But it's because I didn't realize what was going on, and I only
Right,
brushed her off because I was just like, no, that's impossible. And maybe the staff thought the same thing, like, no, it's impossible. But I do think as medical professionals, they should have maybe realized some of the
absolutely.
things that I didn't know or realize.
Right, right.
But yeah, it's yeah, my speech, by the way, is a lot better. It gets affected by MS.
Yeah, it
Typically
still
when I'm
does.
running and I get worn down for sure. When I talk for hours on the podcast or on your show or anywhere, I talk a lot because typing is difficult. But I bought one, so I went to Brooks here in Jacksonville, Florida, which is a big rehab
Great place.
facility down in Florida. One of the better ones on East Coast, I think, from
Yeah,
what I know. Obviously, I'm biased. But they had an IOP machine that I used a lot for speech therapy. I wound up, you can't actually buy one from them, but I somehow contacted the manufacturer in 2020. And I guess probably again to my luck, the pandemic happened and somehow I got in touch with somebody. He sold me my own. I spent like $2,000 on an IOP machine, which is like that machine that tests for speech strength. It has a ball with
yeah,
a thingy. Yeah, you probably used it. It's they're not as common as they should be, and they're not a very sophisticated device. Really, at least you could imagine there's levels, but you could certainly make a kind of an easy level where you don't have to necessarily measure everything. You could just do the work of squeezing the ball under your tongue. And
yes,
I got into that because when I had the MS, they were like not going to let me eat at first. I'm like, no, I could swallow. I'm a big guy. I could swallow a bagel whole. And they were worried about
right.
me choking and things like that. So I was like, well, we're going to fix this because I'm not eating. I'll eat
Right.
healthy, but I'm eating.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Ah,
So I bought that machine. That's been a big purchase. I told you yesterday. So I was in such bad shape. This is how far gone they thought I was in the early 2020. I got approved for a power wheelchair with
right. Yeah,
zero pushback or hesitation. My insurance company paid for that in full. They're like, "You're going to need it." I haven't needed it since they dropped it off.
yeah, yeah. You said that.
Well, that's not true. I did for a little bit in 2020. I was in a wheelchair for most of 2020. Certainly when I was going out, thankfully in Florida, I could get the lockdowns weren't as strong here. So like I was going to therapy ish, had to wear the
Yeah,
mask. But I would get out of the house at least to go to the grocery store. But I was riding the motorized scooter cart in the beginnings. Stroke is really humbling.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
You
It
you
definitely
look at
does.
those things, you're like, I don't want to ride that, and then you're like, I have to ride that. So
Yeah. And now what are you doing? Because I know, let's see, what is it called here? Survivorscience.com.
yeah,
That's
so
you,
survivorscience.com is sort of a so I was a developer for many years, WordPress developer. This is actually built on a different platform, but I write a bunch of articles and I need to continue writing there.
yeah.
Again, I've gotten a little sidetracked with things because of school, so I'm still figuring out
Right.
balancing family, stroke recovery, all the things with school. But I have articles up there that I think would be helpful. I try to just come from a place of like, now what I'm doing is kind of going back in the Rolodex, so to speak, of like, okay, if I had the stroke again from day one, what are the things I'd want to know? What are the things that I
Yeah,
believe? And I do, like I told you, I love your show and I love what people like yourself and others do because I want to hear from other survivors. I've been in enough therapy groups, enough, you know, facilities to know what the people are saying is genuinely true, but I think it hits harder, at least for me, when you hear it from another survivor.
yeah,
I want to hear, I'd love to hear what you did in the beginning. Like, it's like, yeah, how did you go from being a stroke survivor with MS to 3.5 years in deciding to start running one day and 21 months later, I've run 10,000 miles. Like, that was part ridiculous, part joke. It started as a joke.
right. And you
I
did it.
just wanted to see if I could run. And then
Right.
very much like Forrest Gump, which may have had some impact on my life because that came out in 94, I think, or 90, 92, 93, 94, that time frame
Right?
had an impact on me. And it's like, you think it's like run, Forrest, run. And Forrest ran
Yeah.
across the country and then
We did
back
it.
across the country. The
Yeah.
name of my podcast, real quick, is the Lovable Survivor podcast. I started last year. I've had a couple different podcasts over the years, but and the name right now is the Lovable Survivor podcast, but I think I'm going to morph it in with the Survivor Science brand and maybe rename it under Survivor Science.
Good.
But so my previous podcast was the Lovable Idiot podcast that I started 2020
Yeah.
after my stroke. Got me talking. I realized the benefits of it. I was sharing my story. I kind of, I like different podcasts. Joe Rogan, a lot of comedians. Joe Rogan just happens to be the one I've been watching a lot
Yeah.
recently. He has interesting thoughts and interesting people of
Oh,
all
yeah.
backgrounds and
Absolutely.
diversities and different stories.
Yes.
So yeah, podcasting is a big thing for me. Just like
Good.
I actually have Restream too because I do some live streaming sometimes. A good friend of mine, Chris Hennessy, does a lot of live streaming here on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and yeah, I guess I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah, sorry,
I do
stroke
the
brain.
same thing.
Yeah,
I
stroke
interrupt
brain. I
them.
like to call it, but it's yeah, how to lose the weight. Literally, corny as it sounds, just like Survivor Science is again why I started the blog. It's kind of to chronicle the journey. I have obviously chronicled it along, but I didn't share it early on. So it's like I'm going back and sharing the stories and the lessons that I've learned. The weight, I think in the hospital I lost about 100 pounds during the first 90
Great.
days. And you think about it, I was drinking 20 beers a day for close to 20 years. So you take that out of your diet, that's,
Yeah.
turns out that's about 100 pounds. And I think doing the physical therapy and then the first year was really hard being in the wheelchair. But again, everybody was kind of locked down because of the pandemic. So before I had the stroke, I knew when we got here and moved into the house that I was going to get in better shape.
Right.
Unfortunately, a little too late for me, but I had bought a one of the home Smith machines. So I had a lot of weightlifting equipment here, and I just started slowly. I remember being in the wheelchair and having my wife help me onto the bench and strapping myself onto the bench to do
That,
bench press and incline press, and
that must have been a
that
scene.
that was interesting. And at the end of 2020, I probably about a month or two, I got the AFO. So I started walking so I could at least be out of the wheelchair and slowly
Right.
at least walk into the garage and do some weightlifting. Again, humbling, right? A big dude. I was doing like 5-pound dumbbells. I was like, this is
Really?
garbage. But it turns out you can't just pick up 50-pound dumbbells when you're a stroke survivor.
Absolutely. I understand.
So little by little, and then 2021, when I decided to leave my job in the middle of 2021, sort of as the Great Resignation was starting, just happened to coincide again with my stuff. Really nothing to do with the Great Resignation, had everything to do with me and my desire to change. Started going to the gym full time. I felt comfortable at that point. Going back to the gym, it was very quiet because people were still worried about the pandemic. I started with the bike. I started with the step machine. And then, about a year into it, I started with a personal trainer at the end of 2021. That got me pretty good and motivated. And I started to realize if I do things slowly but surely, it actually
Yeah.
works and you can rebuild. 22, I got the Peloton bike. I started riding that to an insane level to the point where I actually was starting to hurt my butt. So that's when I decided later in 2022, October of 2022, to start running. And I've been running ever since.
Nice. Good
Yeah.
for you.
So,
Wow. So what do you
yeah.
tell somebody? I know you've got, I'm sure, what would you tell somebody that's going through, we're newbies that just had a stroke, had something? I mean, what do we do? I mean,
Yeah.
why me?
I think in the beginning, you take everything everybody's saying with a grain of salt, but you
Hmm.
do sort of absorb it and you keep an open mind because they're not wrong, but it is hard to listen.
Yeah.
Some people will be wrong, some people will be right. and it is very individualized to your situation, your personality, how you want to do. I mean, maybe not everybody's like me. Like, I didn't have a choice. I had to figure it out for myself, for my family. My parents had passed away a couple of years ago prior to my stroke. I just have sisters, but like they live all over the states. And so I knew I had to figure it out, and I was going to figure it out, and I've proven that, and I know that if I can do it, you can do it. Losing that weight, not easy. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of
Right.
focus. You have to do the research. You have to realize, some of it's simple, right? If you eat 30 pounds of cake a week, well, eat 0 pounds of cake a week.
Yeah.
You have to find the things that work for you. I think I've also found diet, nutrition to be of the utmost importance. And again, this used to bother me in the beginning. They'd be like, "Oh, well, if you just walk," I'd be like, "You MFer, I'm in a
Yeah.
wheelchair."
Yeah.
Like, this
Yeah.
was the first year.
Uh-oh.
Like, "Oh, just go for a walk." Well, okay. How do you propose, doctor, that I go for a walk while I'm sitting in your office in a wheelchair? Just
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
enlighten me how that happens. Like,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, things like breath work, things like meditation, things that do not require walking. I fell into them later. I actually wish I had learned about them sooner,
Yeah.
because you got to find the things that you can do in the state you're in. If you're in a
Yeah.
wheelchair, you're not going for a walk. You've got to figure out
Yeah.
basics. Realizing it takes time is a true statement. Hearing
Yeah.
that from other stroke survivors is much more helpful than hearing it from somebody working in the hospital who's just like, and they have seen things, and their advice is not unhelpful, but it can seem unhelpful. So yeah, I think the biggest advice is keep an open mind. Realize that nobody, this stinks to say, but nobody is coming to save you.
Yeah. And it's funny you said, well, I thought you're prime example of you have to advocate for yourself because no
You
one's
do.
gonna, right? I mean,
And that is true in every sense of the word. It comes to your physical rehabilitation, it comes to your mental rehabilitation.
same thing.
I'm a millennial. I'm probably the last of the people who will talk on a phone, but you have got to understand the skill of arguing over the phone with medical companies,
Oh,
insurance. It's a struggle. You
yeah.
get bills for seemingly no reason sometimes. You have to question everything. Thankfully, I am really good at asking questions. I am unapologetic about asking questions. I'm never rude to people on the phone because I realize a lot of people are just doing their job, but you as a patient have the right to know what you're paying for. I'm more than willing to pay for things that actually make sense, but you should also be mindful of, like, a hospital will charge you $2,000 for a Band-Aid. You go to Amazon and buy 2,000 Band-Aids for $2. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
that's being, I'm exaggerating, but like, you
I
do
understand.
sort of have to realize that, yeah, the doctors are not there to save you. They genuinely do mean well, but I think sometimes they get overwhelmed or in their own world, and they're just like, a lot of doctors are there to help you with certain things. They will
Right.
prescribe things that they seemingly have looked at the research and think are the right thing for you. In my case, I have MS and I'm a stroke survivor. Not a typical combination.
Right.
So, some of the drugs that I need or use, I have to be like, well, this thing that I need says this shouldn't be mixed with that. And like,
Right.
it's a lot of science. It's a
Yeah.
lot of, you kind of have to become an expert to yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
It's not easy. It's definitely hard, and that's why I started, Survivor Science, and now I have the community portion that I'm really trying to advocate and get people to come in together, because community is a big part, and a lot of people have access to local support groups. I think there is a big need, and there's a lot of information on stroke, but it's all
Yeah.
over the place. Coming together and having a place where you could talk to other survivors. Some of my therapy team is joining in, and like, it's a very fuzzy thing, right? Because when medical professionals have a duty to their clients, but they also have to protect themselves and their families from medical lawsuits, medical malpractice. It gets
Yeah.
very, the word is shitty. It gets
Yeah.
very
It is.
shitty. Like
It is.
it's unfortunate for them because they got into the profession to help you as a neurological event survivor, and they're just putting a rock in a hard place, and you're also putting a rock in a hard place because
Yeah.
you've got to figure out things, and it's just it's fascinating. I could talk about it endlessly, but yeah, I just think more survivors supporting other survivors, continuing to talk about the responsibilities and the yeah, and it can be discouraging too, as I told
Yeah.
you. Um, some people don't want to fight, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I could imagine if I was 75 and have a stroke, I might approach it very differently than having a midlife stroke.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that is entirely fair.
Yeah.
But I also know a 75-year-old in my stroke group who actually inspired me so much that that's kind of how I got the ball rolling on going back
Good.
for my master's at 41.
Right. Right.
And she's just like, I don't want to live, even if I only live another 5 or 10 years. I'd rather enjoy it, and I'm going to work hard at it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
not
They
everybody's
do.
like that, but yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
nobody's coming to save you is my biggest advice, and you immediately have to take action, and that looks different for everybody,
yeah.
and do as much as you can in the beginning and realize it is a process and it is going to be a long journey. And if it's not long, you're lucky.
Yeah.
You could take
Well,
that as a stroke of luck. No
yeah.
pun intended.
No, no, it's funny that you mention all this stuff because I keep thinking back if I wish I would have known back then what I know now.
Yeah.
'Cause I was so lost, didn't know but
Yeah.
and it seems like you're doing so much with your community.
Trying.
Kind of, and you have like some therapists out there that are joining too, aren't they? And
Yeah.
helping out.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think, I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole, but I think the more you look into it, it gets very deep,
Yeah,
and it's just like you start to realize it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, everybody's trying to do the best they can, but
yeah,
not everybody has your best interests at,
yeah.
at, at,
That's right.
at the front of their thing. So
Yeah, yeah. No,
it's a
absolutely.
balance.
Yeah, it's great to talk to stroke survivors because we all understand each other, and that's
Yeah. Yeah. And I
awesome.
think that would be more helpful, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
granted, I kind of, the pandemic hadn't really happened when I was an inpatient, but I feel like if I had met more stroke survivers at inpatient rehab that
yes,
were maybe a little further along that
yeah,
could have provided some guidance in either a group setting or just I remember one woman who was visiting in January 2020. She was a survivor. She had been there. She was just stopping by and visiting people, and she's like, "Yeah, my handwriting's still terrible, but like, I pick and choose." And it's tough too because maybe you just don't want to hear things in the beginning because you're just
y-
so overwhelmed by it.
yeah,
But looking back, it's like her advice did make sense. It was like, oh yeah, it does take time, but
yeah. No, I totally agree. I was in the beginning. I was embarrassed that I had a stroke. That's
same.
how I felt in the beginning.
Hmm.
Stroke support groups. I hid behind people. Don't call on me. First of all, I talk crappy, and
Hmm.
but then things went on, and now you're advocating for all of us out there to help other people out there that what we're going through, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is, and it's a humbling experience to go through. And I always say this too to other survivors: it is. I'm sure I am not totally correct in this, but it is quite possibly the hardest thing a human being can come back from because you think of a lot of things. Unfortunately, some things result in a death, right? And
Yeah,
you're obviously not coming back from that. But you think about cancer and like the success rates and the research being done there, like people typically can, they become a cancer survivor that it's sort of, there's variances and people come, they get it, that comes back. But like
yeah.
a neurological event, I
It's
mean,
no,
is the hardest thing, I think. And again, maybe I'm wrong. Parkinson's is probably up there. I now knowing more about dementia, I imagine that's got to be unbelievably awful.
that's hard.
Yeah, but trying to come back from a stroke is like it's
Yeah,
not a broken leg, it's not a broken finger, it's not a broken bone of any kind. It's a
right.
broken brain.
Right. Exactly. We've lost so many cells or brain cells, thousands,
Yeah,
thousands.
neuroplasticity is a real thing, and you
It really is.
can work at it, but it's there again. There's no magic pill. There's nothing that's going to change it overnight. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being on, man.
I
This is,
appreciate you having me,
you know,
Jerry. It's been great.
yeah, absolutely. We could be doing this for a long time but it is. I'll tell you, you are very inspiring. Just, you know,
Thank you, very appreciate
as
it.
long as
Like
if
you
we,
as well.
no, yeah, absolutely. Well, but,
I'm
but
glad to do this, so I'm glad to be a part of it. And anytime I can be a help or be on as
yeah,
a guest or help answer the questions, let me know for sure.
definitely, absolutely. Well, any last words of anything?
Nah, I
Uh,
think I'll I'll leave it there. I think I've said enough today.
yeah, you did a great job, and I appreciate it too. And I appreciate
Thanks.
everybody being here too. So,
Yeah, thanks to everybody being here and asking questions. I appreciate it as well.
yeah.